Rockets are up against it on the road tonight, facing a 3-1 deficit if they can't beat the Dubs. Chris Paul under 40% shooting in the two losses so far. Steph Curry, meanwhile, back after his Bay Area bucket binge in Game 3 and ready to go tonight, 9 Eastern time on TNT. Hey, everybody, good to have you with us. It is Game Time on the air. Matt, Zeke, Griff here on the desk. Rockets and Warriors on the floor for Game 4 of the Western Conference Finals from Oakland. You know what I would like to see?
Matt, Zeke, and Griff?
No, we're seeing that right now. You know what I would like to see tonight? I would like to see what happens when both the Warriors and Rockets play really, really well, like at their best in the same game.
You know, if that happened, then I think it would be a massive Golden State blowout.
Really?
Yeah.
Massive blowout.
Massive. I mean, if Clay plays at his peak, all right, and Steph plays at his peak, Durant and Draymond Green, they all play at their peak, I just don't see any team ever being close to them in the NBA that's playing right now today. Even if all those guys have peak performance in a game, there's no way Houston can keep up, even if they play at their peak.
Even a team specifically built to beat that team. Interesting.
These are theories, right?
Sure. Yeah, sure.
Specifically built to beat them the best you're capable of trying to beat them.
Right.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting. I thought the first half of Game 1 was some incredibly high-level basketball, incredible shot making. I think Harden had more than 20 in the half. Durant had an incredible second quarter, I believe it was. Everything he wanted to do off the dribble with the pull-up he was able to do. It was a 2-point game maybe at halftime of that game. It was close.
Yeah.
And I thought, wow, this series is really going to be played at a high level.
Right.
And since then, it's been all one team or another throughout. And I think that has a lot to do with how important it is for Golden State to make shots. And when they're shooting, of all the teams left in the playoffs, they have the biggest gap between wins and losses and field goal percentage. They're shooting just barely 40% when they lose and almost 50% when they win. And it really, to them, to a huge degree, it comes down to, do they make the shots they get? Because their offense is going to get them pretty much all the time.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, there's a good chance we won't see Golden State at their very best tonight because there is at least a question mark as to Andre Iguodala's availability to be on the floor with his teammates. Questionable is his status for tonight after he suffered what the Warriors call a left lateral leg contusion in Golden State's Game 3 run. That is a diagnosis I've never, ever heard before. Nonetheless, he is questionable for tonight, and if he's not out there, what changes for both teams?
Well, you know, defensively, he is their stopper. And, you know, Steve Kerr has, you know, compared him to, you know, the great defender in Scottie Pippen. So, you know, what changes for them is, you know, when you look at what he does and what he brings to the game, you know, he's guarding the best player. He pushes the basketball. He's long. He's athletic. And I think this is an accurate comparison in today's game because when you look at what Scottie Pippen was able to do for the Chicago Bulls, he was long. He was athletic. He pushed the ball in transition. He was able to pass. He was able to defend. He did multiple things for the Bulls that Iguodala does for Golden State. So having that type of player out on the floor with that type of, you know, mental stability in terms of understanding your offense, understanding your defense, you know, Iggy is probably the guy who's their most important player on defense because he's their quarterback defensively. He's their Mike Singletary. He's their Ray Lewis defensively in terms of barking out orders, making sure that everybody's supposed to be where they're supposed to be, and then he can roam all over the floor.
He started 12 of their 13 playoff games so far, has the third best net rating of the postseason among all players to this point in the playoffs. He's also, of course, part of the so-called Hamptons Five, previously known as the Death Lineup, whichever you prefer, which has a net rating of nearly plus 23. In other words, that fivesome outscores opponents, Griff, by about 23 points per 100 possessions. In other words, if they were to play out an entire game, they would blow out everybody in the world.
Yeah, and I think they tend to.
Yeah.
And what you said about his mental stability, I think, is really important. If we can say that Draymond Green's the heart and soul of that team emotionally and sort of their emotional center, Andre is probably the brains of their defense. He's so smart in terms of his body placement on the weak side all the time. He's always in the right place. He's really going to be somebody who is about the right things the entire defensive possession. So here we see him lock up with Chris Paul. You can switch him on to a point guard. He's going to guard James Harden. Some of those other clips you saw him be able to defend Capella. But look how he takes the contact from Chris, doesn't go down, keeps him from driving the center of the lane, can recover and challenge, to your point about his length and athleticism. He's really unique that way. Here he's going to get into Harden in much the same way, gives up his chest, keeps himself from fouling, doesn't reach in, because Andre knows that James is almost entirely predicated on his offense gets started at the free throw line. That's how he finds flow. So you're not going to see Andre commit silly fouls. And to your point about mental stability, he really is the guy who's the most important for them, maybe on both sides of the ball in terms of being the glue guy who makes it all work.
You know, he's been an all-star. He was the finals MVP, obviously, but at this point in his career on this team, most of his value doesn't show up in traditional sort of stats. You're not going to look at the box score and say, oh, Iguodala had 35 tonight, but he does so much for that team. It'll be interesting to see what happens if he's unavailable here tonight. Let's bring in Sekou Smith, who is locked into this series the way Steph Curry was in the third quarter of Game 3. And let's start right there. It's not like the Rockets didn't know Steph was capable of that sort of outburst, but now that it's happened, what's the effect moving forward?
Well, I think there's a fear factor, Matt, in terms of defensively. You're always playing Steph for his offense and for his scoring, his floor stretching ability, and the fear of that defensively affects not just the guy guarding him, but all the help defense. So it could be a very tricky thing for the Rockets if they start playing the tendencies and start cheating on their guy to worry about Steph, and then that ball, you know, rotates and finds Klay Thompson or Kevin Durant or somebody else. Very important for the Rockets to come here tonight and lock in on the task at hand and not get caught up in what Steph did in the previous game or what he could do potentially tonight.
Well, that kind of performance, though, that can leave scars for games to come afterward. You know, Mike D'Antoni has run some really freewheeling offenses during his career, but the Rockets had 20 turnovers in Game 3, which equaled their assist total. What's the right balance between being decisive and aggressive, but not being sloppy the way they were in Game 3?
Well, so much of the issue, Matt, is you know, Chris Paul and James Harden and the tone they set. If they're handling the ball and pounding away for 10, 12 seconds off the shot clock, you're not leaving other guys a whole lot of time to make sound decisions if the ball finds them. So, you know, so much of it starts with the decisive play of both those guys. You know, they run a deliberate offense. This is not Mike D'Antoni's old offense from Phoenix. I know a lot of people assume that's what they're doing. It's not. It's a much more deliberate system, an ISO system that plays to the strengths of James Harden and Chris Paul. They're the trigger guys. They have to share it in order for everybody else to get involved, in order to keep that defense guessing.
And even Mike D'Antoni is saying they need to speed it up. In other words, be more decisive. Don't necessarily hunt out that particular matchup you want in pick and roll. Sekou, it'll be fun to watch. Hope you enjoy it tonight, and we'll talk to you soon.